Imagine a room full of people in a crisis. Alarms are going off, someone is shouting, and in the middle of all that chaos, one person is completely still. Not frozen with fear, not in shock, simply thinking. Clearly, calmly, quietly. And everyone else in the room looks to that person, because without raising their voice or making a single dramatic gesture, they have become the most powerful presence there. We tend to think of strength as something loud, fast, visible, something that pushes hard and hits back harder. But what if the deepest kind of strength has no sound at all? Today we will follow three very different lives, separated by time and circumstance, but connected by one rare quality: the ability to be completely still when the world is not. Welcome to English Through Great Stories. I am glad you are here. Settle in, take a breath, and let the story begin. Chapter 1. The Weight of Noise. Thomas was 34 years old, and he was exhausted. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, something deeper, a constant buzzing restlessness that lived behind his eyes. He worked in a busy marketing office in Manchester, England. His phone never stopped, his calendar was always full, and somewhere along the way he had forgotten what silence felt like. Every morning, Thomas woke up and immediately reached for his phone. Before he had said a single word to anyone, he had already read emails, checked headlines, and responded to messages on a work chat. By the time he arrived at the office, he already felt behind, overwhelmed, already a little bit angry, though he could not quite explain why. His colleagues described him as passionate. His manager said he was driven. His friends said he was intense. Thomas took all of these as compliments. He believed that being busy meant being important, that reacting fast meant being sharp, that if he ever slowed down, he would fall behind. He had confused motion with progress and noise with power. Then one Tuesday afternoon in October, his computer froze during an important presentation. The screen went black, the room went quiet, and Thomas, without thinking, slammed his fist onto the desk so hard that his coffee cup fell and shattered on the floor. The room stared, and Thomas felt a wave of shame so intense that it actually hurt. He sat down. For the first time in years, he had absolutely nothing to say. That night, sitting alone in his kitchen with a cup of cold tea, Thomas asked himself a question he had never asked before. Why am I always so reactive? He did not have an answer, but the question itself was important, the first honest thing he had said to himself in a very long time. And questions, when they come from a real place, have a way of starting journeys. Thomas is not unusual. He is deeply familiar. Many of us live in a world that rewards speed and loudness. We are surrounded by noise, digital noise, social noise, the noise of constant comparison. And we have begun to believe that calm is weakness, that pausing is laziness, that the person who shouts the loudest must have the most important thing to say. But history and science tell a very different story. Chapter 2. The Man Who Had Every Reason to Break. On the 5th of August, 1962, a man was arrested on a road outside a small town in South Africa. He was 43 years old. He had been a lawyer, a fighter, a leader, a husband, and a father. His name was Nelson Mandela, and on that day the government of South Africa locked him in a prison cell, a cell so small that he could touch both walls at the same time if he stretched out his arms. He would remain a prisoner for 27 years. Let that number settle for a moment. 27 years of cold stone floors, of hard labor in limestone quarries under a burning sun, of watching the light change through a tiny barred window, year after year. He missed his children growing up. He missed funerals. He missed birthdays. He missed the sound of ordinary life. Most people faced with such injustice would have broken, would have filled their hearts with hatred, and no one would have blamed them. The system that imprisoned Mandela was cruel and deeply wrong. But Mandela made a different choice, a much harder one. He chose not to be destroyed from the inside. He read, he studied, he exercised every morning in his tiny cell. He learned Afrikaans, the language of his jailers, not to make them comfortable, but to understand them. He believed that understanding was always more powerful than hatred. And through it all, he maintained a dignity so steady and so quiet that it eventually made the people around him uncomfortable. One prison guard, a man named Christo Brand, was assigned to watch Mandela when Brand was still just 18 years old. He had been told Mandela was dangerous, a terrorist, a man to be feared. But when Brand arrived at Robben Island and met this prisoner for the first time, he was confused, because Mandela greeted him warmly. He asked about Brand's family. He treated the young guard as a full human being. Brand later said in an interview, "I expected a monster. I found a gentleman." Over the years, the two men developed a quiet friendship, and Mandela taught Brand something he had not expected to learn from a prisoner, that how you treat people, even those who have wronged you, says everything about who you are. Calm, Mandela showed him, is not surrender. It is a form of profound, unbreakable dignity. On the 11th of February 1990, the gates of Victor Verster prison opened, and Nelson Mandela walked out. He was 71 years old. His hair was grey, but his eyes were clear and completely calm. He raised his fist, not in anger, but in triumph, and the watching world held its breath, because something remarkable had just happened. A man had spent 27 years in a cage and had emerged more free than the people who had put him there. Later, Mandela was asked many times, "How did you survive?" His answers were always quiet, always modest. He spoke about choosing to focus on what he could control, his thoughts, his attitude, his character, rather than what he could not. He once said, "I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul." He had not written those words. The poet William Ernest Henley had, but Mandela had lived them. What Mandela understood is that calm is not the absence of feeling. He felt rage, he felt grief, he felt the deep loneliness of a man separated from everyone he loved. But he did not allow those feelings to make his decisions for him. He placed them into a room inside himself and closed the door, not to pretend they were not there, but to keep them from driving the car. Chapter 3. The Surgeon's Hands. Dr. Elena Vasquez had been a cardiothoracic surgeon for 11 years. She operated on hearts. It is perhaps the most intimate kind of work a human being can do, holding another person's beating heart in her gloved hands while they lie unconscious, trusting her completely with the thing they need most to survive. Elena had grown up in a small coastal town in Portugal. Her mother was a nurse. Her father was a fisherman, a man who spent his life reading weather and water, learning to stay calm in storms that could kill him. "The sea does not care how frightened you are," her father used to tell her when she was a child. "You must think clearly, even when your body wants to panic, especially then." Elena carried those words into every operating room she ever entered. On a cold Wednesday evening in January, Elena was performing a valve replacement surgery that should have taken 4 hours. Everything was proceeding well. The patient, a teacher named Robert, was stable. The team was focused. The room was filled with the quiet sounds of surgery. The gentle beeping of monitors, soft requests for instruments, the rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. Then, in the 3rd hour, something went wrong. A vessel that should have been intact began to bleed. Not slowly, fast, the kind of bleeding that changes a surgery from difficult to dangerous in less than 30 seconds. The alarm tone on the monitor shifted. A nurse said, quietly but urgently, "Doctor," and every pair of eyes in the room moved to Elena. Elena did not shout. She did not freeze. She took one breath, one single slow breath, and she spoke, clearly, precisely, without drama. She called for the instruments she needed. She directed her team with quiet authority. Her hands moved with extraordinary steadiness. Later, her anesthesiologist, a man who had worked with dozens of surgeons, would say, "In 15 years, I have never seen anyone manage a crisis that calmly. It was almost unreal." 22 minutes later, the bleeding was controlled. Robert was stable. The surgery finished without further incident. Elena stepped out of the operating room at 10 minutes past midnight, removed her surgical cap, and stood for a long moment in the corridor, breathing slowly, feeling the quiet return to her body. She did not celebrate. She simply stood and breathed and let the calm that had carried her through come down gently like a curtain. One of her younger colleagues, a resident named Mia, found her there and asked the question that had been burning in her mind all evening. "How do you do that? How do you stay so calm when everything is going wrong?" Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm not calm because I'm not afraid. I'm calm because I know that fear won't help Robert. And the one thing he needs from me right now, the only thing, is my best thinking." This is a crucial distinction. Elena was not without fear. Part of her was absolutely frightened, but she had trained herself, year after year, operation after operation, to place her fear to the side, like a tool she did not currently need, and reach instead for clarity. The calm of someone like Elena is not a personality trait you are born with. It is a practice, a discipline, built through thousands of small decisions to choose a measured response over a reactive one, to breathe before speaking, to act from thought rather than from feeling. It is, in every sense, a skill, and like all skills, it can be learned. Chapter 4. What lives inside the storm? To understand why calm is so powerful, we need to take a short journey into the human brain. Deep inside your brain is a small almond-shaped structure called the amygdala, your brain's alarm system. It is ancient, far older than language or reason. Its only job is to detect danger and respond immediately. When the amygdala fires, it floods your body with adrenaline and cortisol. Your heart beats faster, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tighten. This is the famous fight or flight response. This response was essential when our ancestors were running from lions. It is less useful when your computer freezes during a presentation or when someone sends you an angry email. The problem is that your amygdala cannot tell the difference between a lion and a laptop. A threat is a threat, and so it fires hard and fast and leaves your logical thinking brain temporarily offline. Neuroscientists call this amygdala hijacking. When it happens, you stop thinking clearly. You react instead of respond. You make decisions based on fear instead of reason. And here is the important part. The more frequently this happens, the more easily it is triggered. A life lived in constant reactivity trains your brain to become more reactive. The noise feeds itself. But calm works in exactly the opposite direction. When you practice pausing, even for a few seconds before you react, you give your prefrontal cortex, the thinking and decision-making part of your brain, time to come back online. You create what the great psychiatrist Viktor Frankl called the space between stimulus and response. And in that space, he said, lies our freedom, our power, our ability to choose who we want to be. Viktor Frankl knew something about surviving the unsurvivable. He was a Jewish psychiatrist living in Vienna when the Second World War began. He survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz, one of the most terrible places ever created by human being. He lost his wife, his parents, his brother. He lost almost everything. And yet, in those camps, he made a discovery that would change the course of psychology forever. That the last human freedom, the one that no one can take, is the freedom to choose your response. The Stoic philosophers of ancient Greece and Rome had understood something very similar nearly 2,000 years earlier. Marcus Aurelius, who was both emperor of Rome and a devoted student of philosophy, wrote in his private journal, a journal he never intended anyone to read, these words: "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He was one of the most powerful men in the world, and every day he reminded himself that true power was interior. This is the paradox of calm. It looks from the outside like passivity, like giving up. But from the inside, it is the most active, demanding work a human being can do. Reacting is easy. It is automatic. It requires nothing except permission. Calm, on the other hand, requires you to stand between the fire and the fuel and say, "Not today." Research in emotional intelligence has confirmed what philosophers and storytellers have always known. People who can regulate their emotions consistently perform better under pressure, make wiser decisions, and lead more effectively. Calm is not a soft skill. It is perhaps the hardest and most important skill a human being can develop. Chapter 5. The Practice of Thomas. We return now to Thomas, sitting in his kitchen with a cold cup of tea, asking for the first time why he was always so reactive. That question opened a door, and Thomas was brave enough to walk through it. He began to explore the idea that his constant busyness was not strength, it was armor. Something to hide behind, a way to feel important without examining whether he actually felt good. He started small. He made one simple rule for himself. Before he responded to any message or email that irritated him, he would wait 10 minutes. Just 10 minutes. He kept a small notebook on his desk and wrote down what he felt in those 10 minutes. And what he discovered surprised him. More than half the time, after 10 minutes, whatever had seemed urgent felt significantly less so. More than a third of the time, the problem had resolved itself entirely. He began to notice other things. His most reactive colleagues were also the ones who made the most mistakes. The people who seemed the most permanently busy were often the least effective. And he noticed something even more interesting. The one person who seemed completely unruffled, a quiet woman named Sarah, who never raised her voice, was consistently the person his boss turned to when something truly important needed to be done. Thomas asked Sarah her secret. He looked at him with quiet amusement and said, "I don't have a secret. I just decided a long time ago that most things are not as serious as they feel in the first moment, and that my energy is limited, so I choose carefully what deserves it." That was it. No meditation retreat, no special program, just a fundamental shift in how she related to urgency. She had decided not to be a prisoner of the immediate. Over the following months, Thomas built new habits. He left his phone in another room while he ate dinner. He started walking to work 3 mornings a week, not listening to a podcast, not checking messages, just walking, feeling the cold morning air, noticing the sound of his own footsteps. It felt uncomfortable at first, that silence, almost wrong, as if he were wasting time. But gradually it began to feel like the most valuable part of his day. 6 months after the incident, something remarkable happened. Thomas was in a meeting when a client delivered very bad news about a major project. The room tensed. Everyone looked around the table, waiting for someone to react. Thomas felt the familiar pull, the old urge to speak fast, to fill the silence with noise. But instead, he paused. He took a slow breath. And then he spoke, carefully, thoughtfully, with genuine calm. After the meeting, his manager pulled him aside. "That was impressive. You held the room together." Thomas almost laughed. He had done almost nothing, had simply let the first wave of alarm pass and waited for clarity to arrive. And clarity, he was learning, always arrived if you gave it enough room. It was never the loudest voice in the room. It was always the quietest. There is something contagious about calm. When one person in a group stays steady, others begin to steady themselves around them. This is not a metaphor, it is biology. Our nervous systems are designed to co-regulate. We literally feel safer when the people around us are calm. A calm leader does not just make better decisions, they make everyone around them capable of better decisions too. Calm is one of the most generous things one human being can offer another. Chapter 6. 3 Kinds of Strength. Let us bring our 3 characters together for a moment. Nelson Mandela, Elena Vasquez, Thomas. 3 people living in 3 completely different worlds. One in a prison cell on a rocky island. One in a sterile operating room under bright lights. One in a busy office in a northern English city. 3 different forms of pressure. 3 different kinds of storm, and yet each of them found through very different paths the same essential truth. Mandela's calm was forged in the fire of injustice. It was not something he was born with. It was something he constructed, deliberately and painfully across decades of suffering. He chose to interpret his imprisonment not as destruction, but as preparation. He used those years to think, to reflect, to become the man that a free South Africa would need him to be. His calm was his resistance, and it was the most powerful weapon he ever had. Elena's calm was built through repetition, through thousands of hours of study and practice, through choosing again and again to respond with precision rather than panic. She learned that the body can be trained to be calm the same way it can be trained to be strong. Her calm was a kind of craft, refined and perfected like an art form. And Thomas's calm, still new, still fragile, still occasionally broken by a bad day or an unexpected crisis, was perhaps the most human kind of all, because Thomas is still in the process of becoming. He has not yet mastered anything. He falls back into old habits. He sometimes snaps. He sometimes reaches for his phone before he has even opened his eyes. But he also now notices when he does, and noticing is always the beginning. What all three of them share is this: calm is not about removing emotion. It is about having a relationship with your emotion that is mature and honest, being able to say, I feel this, I acknowledge this, and I choose what to do with it. That is a very different thing from suppression. Suppressed emotion is like water behind a cracked dam. It builds until something gives way. What these three people practiced was not suppression. It was integration. There is an old Japanese saying, the bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists. When a great storm comes, the oak, solid, rigid, proud, is the tree that breaks. But the bamboo bends almost to the ground, and when the storm passes, it rises again, unchanged, unbroken. This is what inner calm looks like from the outside. Not stiffness, not hardness, flexibility rooted in something very deep. And perhaps most importantly, calm is a form of love. When you choose to be calm, when you choose not to shout, not to blame, not to escalate, you are giving something precious to the people around you. You are giving them safety. Telling them without words, I am here, I am steady. That is an act of profound generosity, and it ripples outward in ways we can never fully trace. Chapter 7. The Still Point. The poet T.S. Eliot once wrote about what he called the still point of the turning world. An interior place where all the movement and noise of life could be witnessed without being swept away. A point of perfect balance at the very center of the storm. Every person we have met in this story was searching for that still point, and each of them found it. Not by escaping the world, but by going deeper into themselves. The most important thing to understand about calm is this: it does not come from outside. It cannot be given to you by easy circumstances. The people who are most deeply calm are very often those who have faced the greatest difficulty. It is pressure that reveals character. And it is adversity, navigated with honesty, that builds the kind of inner foundation that does not shake. Think for a moment about the people in your own life whom you have considered truly strong. I suspect you do not picture someone loud, not someone who dominated every room or demanded the most attention. You see someone who listened when others spoke. Someone who did not need to prove themselves. Someone who could sit with uncertainty and not collapse. Someone who made you feel, simply by being near them, that things were going to be all right. That quality, that rare and precious quality, is calm, and it is available to every human being who chooses to cultivate it. Not perfectly, not immediately, not without falling and starting again, but available. Because the still point that Eliot wrote about is not a destination you arrive at once. It is something you return to, again and again. Like breathing, like coming home. Nelson Mandela returned to South Africa after 27 years and became its first democratically elected president. He'd built a nation on the foundation of reconciliation rather than revenge. He governed not with the anger of a man wronged, but with the wisdom of a man who had chosen, every single day of his imprisonment, to be something larger than his suffering. He died in 2013 at 95, and the whole world paused to honor him. Elena Vasquez still operates on hearts. She has trained many young surgeons in the years since that cold January evening, and she tells each of them the same thing her father once told her. The sea does not care how frightened you are. What matters is what you do with the fear. She has held hundreds of beating hearts in her hands, and each time, before she begins, she takes one slow, deliberate breath, a small ritual, a return to the still point. And Thomas still works in marketing. He still has difficult meetings and frustrating clients and days when everything feels too loud. But he also has a small notebook on his desk and a habit of walking in the mornings without his phone and a growing capacity to pause before he speaks. These are small things, but they have changed him in ways he could not have predicted. He is learning to be a beginner at calm, and he no longer thinks that is a weakness. So what is the lesson of all this? Perhaps it is simply this. The world will always be noisy. There will always be urgency, alarm, pressure, and pain. There will always be moments when everything seems to demand a reaction from you, fast, loud, and immediate. And in those moments, the bravest thing you can do is to pause, to breathe, to choose your response rather than surrender to your reaction, to be the bamboo, not the oak. Calm people are not people without storms. They are people who have learned to sail. And sailing is not about the absence of wind. It is about knowing how to read it, how to lean into it, how to use it. The storm does not disappear, but your relationship with it changes. And in that change lies everything. Your clarity, your compassion, your power, your peace. There is a final image I want to leave you with. Imagine a lake on a perfectly still morning. The water so quiet you can see the reflection of the sky, the clouds, the trees along the shore, everything mirrored on that smooth surface. Now imagine throwing a stone into the center. Rings spread outward, the reflection breaks. But if you wait, just wait, the rings reach the shore and the water becomes still again. Perfectly still, as if the stone had never fallen. That is the nature of a calm mind. Not a mind that is never disturbed, not a mind that pretends the stones do not fall, but a mind that again and again finds its way back to stillness, that knows stillness is always there, underneath the disturbance, underneath the noise, underneath the fear, waiting patiently for you to return to. Like the surface of a lake, like the space between one breath and the next. Thank you for listening to this story on English Through Great Stories. I hope it has given you not just new words and phrases to carry with you, but something a little deeper, a reminder that the strongest people you will ever meet are very often the quietest ones, the ones who have chosen deliberately and courageously to master the magnificent and difficult art of being still. Until next time, be well, be kind, and whenever the world gets too loud, remember the lake.